Okay, so it's pretty obvious how the Green New Deal could help save lives from things like, obviously, extreme weather events, overall heating, famine, things like that. But how would it actually save lives when it comes to America's addiction crisis? Joining us now to break down the possible link there is a writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Abraham Gutman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here, and I have to say I really enjoyed your write-up about this issue. And I want to start by talking about sort of, I guess, the core argument that one side of the Green New Deal that's being ignored is that it could help to avoid what you term as deaths of despair. Could you explain that to our audience?
Yeah, so I think the core idea is, why do we have an addiction crisis? One maybe compelling, for sure, popular narrative is that the reason we have an addiction crisis right now is because of big pharma and reckless doctors that prescribe opioids that are extremely addictive. In reality, we see that the vast majority of people who get these medications don't get addicted, about 92%, and that these medications have been used, throughout history. So the question is, why do we have this crisis now? Two researchers from Princeton, Ann Casey and Angus Deaton, have looked into that. And what they found is that there's a reduction in life expectancy and an increase in midlife mortality that is related to suicide, to overdose death, and to cirrhosis of the liver that is related to alcoholism. And what they coined is the term death of despair. They said that when life basically doesn't meet expectation, you look for relief. And so as a society that is becoming more unequal, that is becoming perhaps more unfair, structural racism persists, and when you don't see a future for the planet, it makes a lot of sense that there will be a lot of despair right now.
So that is fascinating. You talked about a couple of different factors there. How important is economic inequality to these hypothesized deaths?
So I think a lot. I mean, I don't think that we need too much science and complex hypotheses to make a really clear line. If your life is really hard, if you can't make ends meet, if you're suffering, if you can't provide for yourself, your people you love, and you turn and you find other solutions. And one of those solutions is drugs and alcohol, opioids, meth, crack, what have you. So I think that when you then see that others are living in this like super glamorous, lavish life, like the Capitol and the Hunger Games, compared to your district, I can see that as something that drives a lot of despair and that makes you be very cynical and not want to participate in this game, essentially.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you've described the problem. So how would the Green New Deal function as a solution to that problem?
So I think that the beauty of the Green New Deal is that it finally is a policy that doesn't try to silo issues that aren't siloed, right? So we have a whole system, a whole structure that produces inequalities, that produces the fact that environmental hazards are more concentrated in areas that are black and brown, that we have a gender pay gap and a racial wealth gap. These are all connected. These are all issues that come together. So finally, we have a policy that tries to address those issues together and tries to view them as intertwined and trying to say that the role of the government is to solve this, which otherwise else, what is the role of the government? So if the problem is jobs, and if we need to create more, and we want to fight inequality, and we need to also fight climate change, let's use those jobs to give these jobs to people with stagnant wages or to communities of color that has been hurt by environmental hazard. Let's connect all these issues together. And I believe that by doing that, it provides a lot of hope to this despair.
So that's interesting that you talk about it being sort of inspirational or aspirational. And when I've listened to, especially AOC, but others talk about this policy, they often compare it to other massive challenges that we as a country have been able to meet and defeat. Things like, obviously, some past wars, helping deal with the hole in the ozone layer, acid rain, the space race, like things like that. Do you think that they get this connection, or why do you think that that's sort of one of the planks of how they're messaging around it, this message of inspiration?
Can I say something about inspiration as related to this. I think it's really important. A lot of people are shying away from the Green New Deal as an aspirational document. I think you heard, for example, I believe it was Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is kind of posing herself as a centrist in a Democratic race, she's a co-sponsor of this document, not necessarily as policy, but as more of a aspiration. My excitement is on the Green New Deal as a list of policies that we should implement, not as something that in a different world we would do. Mm-hmm. So the aspiration is important, but people are not going to get out of addiction because, AOC, introduced this resolution. The solution is what the policies are actually, if they will be enacted, right? So I think that's important. I do think AOC gets it. I think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in the Green New Deal resolution, the first 4 pages are heartbreaking to read. They're a list of a lot of societal ailments, and they're not severed by some sections and some, idea of like, let's first talk about climate. Let's then talk about no, they're intertwined, they're interwoven. The idea of voice is mentioned a lot. Let's include people in this process, people who are affected. And I think that's very, very powerful. And I think perhaps as a millennial that is seeing despair around her, maybe that's the push we needed. And perhaps as someone who is trying to think, do I have a life on this planet 40, 50 years from now? Does my 1-year-old daughter? Maybe those are the moments that you go into despair, and those are the moments that someone with that view who thinks about that because it's real connects all the dots together.
Okay, well that is fascinating. I mean, look, I'm going to be honest. I didn't need to be sold on it any more than I already was. But for some people who might have been sort of on the borderline, I think that your piece and the argument you're making could be very important. So Abraham Gutman, writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer, thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for watching this clip from The Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.